Okay, thank you so much, Tavo. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Natalie Kutsia, the business development consultant based in the iTOO Cape Town office. We have two coastal branches, one in Cape Town headed by Tiaan Erasmus, our regional manager, and then one in Durban headed by Rob Ferguson. The topic for today is underwriting food sustainability in a complex environment, and we have chosen this topic as the Western Cape is the largest exporter of agri-products among South African provinces, accounting for almost half of the country's agri-exports. And iTOO Cape Town is a leading insurer in mega agricultural exports like peaches, table grapes, and citrus. Then I just want to mention if there's any questions during the session, you can just pop it in the chat box and we will assist as we go. Then just a special welcome to our two guest speakers today, Bonnie Steyn and Page from Bowmans, a legal partner of iTOO assisting us in complex claims. Bowmans provides legal services throughout Africa in 8 offices within 6 countries. And then just a quick introduction on them both. Bonnie is a partner in the Cape Town office. She has BCom and LLB degree from Stellenbosch University and a certificate in medicine and law from the University of South Africa. She is also an admitted attorney, notary, and conveyancer. Jay is a senior associate in the Cape Town office. He has business science and LLB degree from the University of Cape Town and is an accredited mediator through conflict dynamics. They both have experience in insurance litigation, assisting insurance with preliminary investigations, defending insureds in civil claims on behalf of insurance, including the drafting of merits and quantum opinions, drafting policy response opinions, and subrogated recoveries. Welcome to the two of you, and we look forward to your insights. Then lastly, before I hand over to Tiaan, I just want to introduce our Cape Town team. The team has grown tremendously over the last few years, and we are a team of 10 iTOO experts in the Cape, led by Tiaan Erasmus, whom I will hand over to now. Thank you, Tiaan.
Good morning, everybody. It's been a while since I've done one of these, and thanks, Natalie, for the introduction. I'm excited to sort of start the process for the coastal team. So I'm Tiaan, as Natalie said, and I look after the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal. And today we're going to try and unpack some issues, underwriting food sustainability in a complex environment. And then I think in about 2 weeks, next Tuesday is Women's Day. So, and in 2 weeks, Rob Ferguson and his team will discuss rebuilding KwaZulu-Natal. So actually 2 great iTOOsdays that's ahead of us. We're going to hope to keep you entertained today. And I'm going to quickly chat about the agenda, and I must probably just have a look so that I can kind of keep tabs with the time. The Q&A, Natalie, if you can just kind of check that, but I think deal with that afterwards. I'm not that well versed with Zoom, much more comfortable on Teams. So we're going to talk about risk and underwriting food sustainability in a complex environment. I think we've seen over the past couple of months that that food and food production is becoming a topic that's discussed more frequently in media and operationally and in academic circles. We're going to chat about some of the impacts on climate change, the need of rising demand for food, feeding more people, technologies, resilience against local and global economic factors. I think that's also quite relevant today. And then also from there, we're going to start getting into the discussion of, consumers changing, consumers' tastes, food safety. And then we're going to start the discussion on underwriting product liability and product recall for foods. And from there, we're going to hand over to Bonnie and Jay to take us through some actual practical examples that hopefully we can all learn from. So the reason why we're also doing this is, other than being, in the Western Cape and is I think agriculture is quite a big, is quite a driving force in our economy. Myself, I've got a bit of an agri background with Oupas of Millibur and Dalmas. And I'm also fortunate enough to have the better half. She's an operational manager on a farm, and I actually brought some of the produce today, so I hope you can see it. They produce lemons, some olives and olive oil. I don't know if you can see olive oil. And then, of course, being in the Western Cape, I mean, if you have a farm and you don't produce any wine, you should probably stop farming. So the discussion will not be about livestock, really. I think it's more so what I guess, we find interesting and what's driving our economy and some of the risks that we actually see on our books today. So, when we underwrite agricultural risk, or just look at it in general, and I think those of you that look at, whether it's smaller farmers or even some of the large mega farmers, the risk practitioners out there, is that it's becoming, we know it's becoming a massive business. And we also know that globally, that markets are under pressure due to food inflation. In South Africa, food price inflation is currently at 7%. And I mean, when we did the research and the slides, I think about 2 weeks ago, that was at 7%. And depending on what some of the what sort of media you're into, that you'll even get higher numbers as well. We also know that expensive food groups drive hunger. I think a good example would be olive oil. And also, if we look at what, the IMF and, Professor Willemse from the Economist, or an economist at Agrimark Consultants, is also saying that Sub-Sahara is a danger zone for food shortage in the IMF. We are net importers of food, and the exchange rate is obviously driving food inflation as well. We want to also try and just keep it local. And if I say local, just our neighbors. So recently we had Zimbabwe farmers without crop from the government agency, and the government agency confiscating crops. As crops become smaller, we'll get into, some of the changes in environment as well. So the outlook in general, it looks a little bit bleak, but we'll get to some of the, some of the real opportunities out there. Is that there are smaller crops, increasing production costs, for instance, fertilizer, diesel. We've all gone through the recent power outages. So yeah, so the outlook doesn't look too great, but we're going to try and unpack some opportunities for you and for our clients out there. So, the IMF estimate net imports for Sub-Saharan Africa for 2021 and 2022. I think some of these numbers are 2019, but, it still gives you an idea, as to, to the contextual environment. Namibia imported 230,000 ton of maize. So, just try and kind of wrap your head around that. Botswana, 300,000, Mars, 200, and Kenya, 700,000 ton. Whereas in South Africa, we have a net surplus of 3.5 million tons of maize. So, again, as I said earlier, we're gonna try and not to be too bleak, but also sort of highlight some of the opportunities that we think there are. In 2032, the UN estimates more African dependency on agri products. However, it's, the consensus is that South Africa will remain a net exporter of foods in general, so creating more and more opportunity. So some of the, when we chatted earlier, we're going to talk about climate change, we're going to talk about rising demand, etc. So climate change, unless your name is Donald Trump, we know that it is actually real out there. And we know that the earth is heating up and getting dry at a rapid pace. If we want to talk about some extreme weather events as well, not only locally, but you look at the California drought, the devastating fires in Australia a couple of years ago. But, the IMF, and Professor Midgley reckon that worldwide temperatures will be rising by 1 to 1.5% by 2050. For Southwest Africa, so particularly for us, we're talking about Cape Town, Namibia, Western Cape and Northern Cape, it's estimated that it could be double the world average. And in give or take, 80 years, there's a forecast for 5 Celsius warmer, and from there, every millennium, another 5 degrees that the Earth is getting hotter. So not really great news, and I think that's why climate change is always a relevant and much debated topic. Bringing it closer to home, and specifically, sort of the coastal region, even is the extreme weather events. We had the Western Cape drought in 2015 and up to 2018. We know that Western Cape was close to a day zero. We also know that in the Eastern Cape, it's a combination between drought and just improper management, but that there's water scarcity there. And also earlier this year, the devastating, actually KZN should be 2022, but the KZN floods in April. Some predictions that the Western Cape, that it's going to move from soft rain, it's going to be floods versus the soft rain that we're currently experiencing, and resulting in soil erosion and loss of nutrients. So the loss of topsoil and nutrients, that's actually my better half. I think she's on the call today, but she actually, as I said, she's a farmer, and she actually reckons that the loss of topsoil and nutrients, that's the most valuable asset for a farm. And if you think about it, whether it's livestock or whether you're planting crop, it's really kind of there where the earth feeds us, whether it's, whether it's plant or animal. So I think going on to, a rising demand for more food and of high quality. And I think later on in the slides, we're going to, there's some estimates as to where we're going to end up. I think in a couple of years, or a good couple of years, we're going to be 10 billion people to feed. So, meeting a rising demand for more food. And of course, we want a better quality of food. And since 2016, I think just have a look at some of the export growth in South Africa. So citrus, 26 million, but we also know that, currently there's a dispute, and that the South African government has actually declared a dispute with the EU I think we're getting into it later as well, where they've started to introduce this cold chain environment, when, there's, where they think there's protectionism from Spain to protect their citrus exports. But in any event, you look at exports of 26 million. This is in 2019, when I think the ports were still fairly okay functioning. But wine exports locally here, or in the Western Cape, of 10.6 billion. Citrus 26 billion. Table grapes, also, look at Northern Cape and a few other regions, that export table grapes at 10.5 billion. Apples at 7.1. And then when we go further up north, we're looking at some maize exports of 7 billion. So it's quite, I think it's impressive numbers. But then you look at some of the imports and, and food that we all know that most of us have in our cupboards today, rice of 7 billion, wheat. We all know the impact the war in Ukraine, or the conflict, whichever way you want to see it. Palm oil, those of us that enjoy Steers chips, I know, or I do. So palm oil, most of it is made with palm oil. And then chicken, but chicken can also be a controversial subject. We just, I think just yesterday, Minister Patel, decided to scrape some tariff imports on chicken, and so you've got the local guys arguing there's dumping. But of course, we still got to feed. There's a large percentage of our population where that rely on chicken as a staple protein. So I think I'm not going to try and encourage debate today, but these are really things, like I said, it's things that we should continuously think about. When we look at food and whether it's the underwriting of it, or looking at it, or just on the sustainability, is also where farmers should adopt and learn innovative technologies to increase farm productivity. We know that labor especially in South Africa, that we do have regular labor unrests. A couple of months ago, we know that in Robertson you had some migrating laborers and the locals clashing. But farmers are looking to replace manual labor, to avoid increase in labor costs, also increase in productivity. Test probes, I've got to say again, thanks to Madly for that. They use test probes, soil management, moisture and irrigation schedules. They're just with test probes that that just from a single test that you can manage contextually so much more of your environment. The moisture, the irrigation schedules, fertigation systems nowadays, that precisely inject fertilizer and supplements into the ground, reducing human, mistakes. And of course, for those of us that do underwrite, fertigation or fertilizers, unfortunately not iTOO in general, but yeah, I think also reduces the risk there. Drones, we all know drones, whether it be chemical application and as well as measuring crop health and security in general. And then GMO is not really something I'm going to get into too much. I think that's also where one could have some robust debate, is whether you believe in GMOs, and that is genetically modified organisms where, it's tastier, the yield is better. But I think if we go back a few slides, we, there's a higher demand for food, and, whether it's tastier and better food, then there's certainly a place for GMOs. And for those, that are fortunate enough to, to buy organic produce, I would say great. But yeah, I think there's definitely a place for GMOs in our environment, within the agricultural environment. So one of the areas we also want to sort of just touch on, and like I said, today is more of a techie, so normally would really chat about the product's liability and the recall and some of the risks there, but just some of the global and contextual issues and that I think that our farmers face: resilience against local and economic factors. And these also, for those of you brokers out there, that deal with agri clients, I know, up here in the Boerland, and I would imagine Free State, Northwest, Limpopo, Midlands. So, for those of you that deal with agri clients and being a risk practitioner, moving away from just merely giving insurance advice, some of that I actually got from a textbook as well, but the UN note conflicts and crises and natural disasters are going to be increasing in number, and we see that, those of us that just follow the news and see that crises escalate. Rethinking of food systems and governance, for meeting for current and future changes. Whether you're a smaller crop farmer, livestock farmer, or one of the mega farmers, you've got to have an integrated agricultural strategy, and it's not much different to any other type of form of business out there, which include the basic SWOT analysis. And you just think about a few things that really stand out. We look locally at policy reform. We know that the governing party is currently in their Congress leading up to leadership elections in 2024, and the issue of land reform is popping up. So it's very difficult for anybody that relies on land to really reinvest back when there's not future certainty. But you also look at EU subsidies, where we know that the European Union, the US, some of the more developed countries that provide subsidies and protect their interest and their agricultural industries, with subsidies, as well as import tariffs, sort of either, limiting competition or driving competition, and, whichever kind of suits, which agendas. But yeah, develop production strategy, and this is resource planning, crop versus livestock. Earlier I showed you, 3 types of products that's derived from a farm just out here in France. Some diversification, that's an actual tangible example. And modern finance budgets, things have definitely changed where, it is a business. and finance is just really part and parcel of managing a agricultural business. Risk management will always be important. Most of us are in risk, and again, some of it land reform, labor and political unrest, risk transfer as well, which is part and parcel of it, including crop protection as well. So this is where I'm going to try and get into, with Bonnie and Jay, and this is going to be a lot more involved in what we do on a day-to-day basis. And by we, I mean underwriters and you as brokers dealing with anybody that, or, with clients that either in some way produce or, manipulate any type of food product. But yes, we know that consumers, that there are continuous change in taste, then we're not even getting into the whole millennials versus us, I think Gen X. But yeah, we know that the UN estimate the world population to grow up to almost 10 billion. That's 10 billion people to feed. We've also seen, the EU recently required, extreme cold temperature treatments for SA citrus. I think earlier when I chatted about it, there's some driving there from Spain to protect their citrus, to protect demand for their citrus products. Health and convenience also shape the demand for agri products. We know that there are really sort of certain sectors within or consumers driving health. We know convenience is important, and also the increased demand for organic produce. And lastly on this, there are consumers that are willing to pay a premium for fresh products, and they also want to know where the products come from, that it's responsibly grown, and that they're safe. And I think you can even see that with some of the top restaurants as well, where where there's a drive where between the chef, the waiter, and eventually the end consumer, everybody knows where the actual product is from, and that it's sourced sustainably. So yeah, this is the last slide from our side. So I just thought I'd bring it in, although the Consumer Protection Act is very much so 2011, but I think it's still fitting just to bring it in, is that it applied to every transaction, and that includes foods. Goods include anything marketed for human consumption. So yeah, and that the act covers the entire supply chain, distribution, marketing, promotion. So when we look at underwriting food, and I think that's particularly important, and also with your clients, when you do sit with them and you present the risk to an underwriter, is we kind of look at what your client produce where in the chain. You're looking at, for instance, citrus, so just whether it's oranges or table grapes being exported, the risk is substantially lower, especially the recall risk, as these products can often just be dumped fairly safely and be withdrawn from the market fairly quickly. As soon as a product, whether it would be a good example would be nuts, peppers was also another good example. So as soon as a product is used in another product, milk powder, for instance, as soon as that product is used as an ingredient, or where it's being manipulated, the risk for us increase exponentially. And that's where you've got to look at the product's liability, the recall, as well as even the CPI coverage, protecting your clients, their net profits. But yeah, just a quick recap. We know that product liability protects our clients from injury and or damage, from the products that are being sold. And a good example would be, I think food poisoning, or in the case of the wine bottles, where, either there's traces of ammonia, or glass in the final product. And then recall is really just about bringing the product back, or taking it out of the stream of commerce and disposing of it. And I think Bonnie and Joe will discuss, but I think some of the additional costs that should be considered during a recall, as well as the costs that are actually covered under a recall program. So for instance, the additional overtime, we're looking at media, the cost of media, managing that reputation, and trying to manage some of the damage that's being done. So yeah, so today was something different for me as well. So really trying to sort of sketch a holistic picture of food production, or I think trying to raise awareness where food is coming from, and some of the risks that we face as underwriters and that your clients face as producers. And I'm going to hand over to the team from Bowmans to walk us through some actual examples. So yeah, so I think if I'm going to stop sharing, and I think Bonnie J, it'll be great if you take over.
Thanks so much, Tiaan. That was a brilliant presentation. It really sets the scene for what we're going to be discussing, which is product recall specifically. But you make the point very well that it's only one component of the risks that an agri or food business might face, and we need to look at everything in its proper context. So I'm going to start off with an overview of the product recall insurance product. And then Bonnie will be discussing an interesting case study, so you can see how it works in practice, or potentially doesn't work in practice. So if you can see what I got here, this is a delicious chocolate-covered ice cream that I intend to partake in this morning. It's one of the coldest mornings in Cape Town, so probably a crazy idea, but not as crazy as you might have been if you were in the US a few years ago and you decided to take a risk on a Bluebell ice cream. On second thought, I'm gonna put this aside. Bluebell was involved in one of the most controversial product recalls in recent history. There were 3 deaths. They paid administrative fines totaling just under $20 million. That included admission of criminal liability. The president of the company faced 7 felony criminal charges, and they had to close down their operation for a significant period of time to get their act together. So that is the kind of risk that we're talking about, and it sets the scene for why this is such an important area for any food or agribusiness. As Tiaan mentioned, very basic definition, product recall occurs when a product is already in the market, but it shows the potential to cause harm to consumers or to property. Bonnie is going to take you through more detail or how the product actually works within the confines of the wording of a typical policy. And you'll see that there are some intricacies that make it not as simple as that sort of very simple basic definition. On screen is the Batmobile, and I like to think of insurance products like sort of motor vehicles. You walk into a dealership and you tell the dealer, I'd like a car. And he says, okay, but what kind of car do you want? And you say, well, one with 4 wheels. You're not necessarily going to get the product that's suitable for your needs. And just like purchasing a car, when you purchase insurance, you want to purchase a vehicle, a product that's going to be suitable for your needs that you can foresee. And just like when you purchase a motor vehicle, you get what you pay for. And one last thing is sometimes there simply does not exist a motor vehicle that's going to cover you for every eventuality. The Batmobile of insurance might just not exist. Interesting, this is not the Batmobile that Christian Bale drove. This one was actually built by a guy in Vietnam, and he's driving around in it to this day. So product recall, who needs it? So as Tiaan mentioned, the CPA looks all the way along the supply chain. And the typical question that you need to ask yourself is whether, and this is for food or any other product for that matter, whether there is a potential for the insured's products to cause a risk of physical harm to persons or property, or if there's a possibility of contamination. And that includes, you might not think, but that includes manufacturers of packaging. We've seen with the advent of COVID, for example, that packaging has become so much more important and could be an independent ground for a recall to be required. So let's just talk about coverage. There we see theft with just about the right amount of coverage. The first kind of coverage that you typically want is first-party cover. So that is coverage where it's your product that is being recalled. And Tiaan mentioned some of the costs. Let's go through them. As a starting point, you're going to want consultant and advisor costs, and that is with the permission or the consent of insurers. And those are going to be specialists dealing with product safety and security, public relations, logistics, legal potentially, all the professionals that you need to assist you at a time when a recall is going to be required. And what's very important about a product recall is the quicker it goes, the quicker you can achieve the recall, the better it's going to be both from a cost perspective and from a reputational perspective. And the reality is that you can't really insure directly your reputation, but you can, through the purchase of a policy like product recall, you can at least safeguard it to some extent. Also covered will be the costs associated with notifying your customers, then the transport and shipping costs of retrieving that product, and then you're going to be sitting with surplus product that's defective. So you're going to need warehousing and storage expenses to be covered, as well as the cost to dispose of those defective products properly. And then naturally, you might need extra personnel in order to conduct the recall, and that's also going to be covered. All of these costs can be relatively astronomical depending on the size of the business, but so it's kind of very important coverage. You'll notice that what isn't necessarily covered is replacement or repair of the actual product itself. So this is covered for all the costs associated with the product recall, not necessarily the product itself. So you need other cover if that's something that you want to cover. Then there's also third-party expense cover. So where you manufacture a product or a component that's going to form part of a final product that's going to go to market, and your product causes the necessity for a product recall, this is the cover that's going to assist you in you being in a position to reimburse that third party for their expenses associated with the product recall. So it'll be all their recall costs. This includes the costs to repair or replace for the third party, cost to repair and rehabilitate the third party's reputation potentially, and the additional costs associated with purchasing substitute products to replace your component. So all those would typically be covered by third-party expense coverage. And in both of those cases, a trigger will either be a voluntary recall. In other words, you suspect that there is a potential defect likely to cause harm, and then you call for the recall. Or, as it happened with the Listeria Poloni issue a few years ago here, the relevant government authority can order that there be a product recall, a mandatory one. So typically what isn't covered, we mentioned the costs of repairing or reconditioning or replacement of the actual product itself. If there is intentional non-compliance with regulatory requirements, and that can extend to things like ingredients, manufacturing processes, packaging, sanitary requirements. But the important thing there is intentional. The other interesting exclusion is natural deterioration, decomposition, or change in the chemical structure of a product. And you might think that's incredibly broad. The caveat there is that you would be covered if it's a result of a manufacturing error. But you can imagine that would be an area for litigation. Administrative or other fines and penalties. We know that in our law, administrative fines and penalties is not insurable. So typically that's excluded. And then losses outside of stipulated time periods. So usually the policy would stipulate a time period for which expenses relating to the product recall are covered. So perhaps it could be 12 months, for example. Let's talk about some issues and considerations. And again, we need to place product recall as just one component of managing the risk of a food or agri-business. So the broker plays a critical role in unpacking exposure. And some of the questions you can ask, well, do you need both first-party and third-party cover? Well, usually, the only time you wouldn't need third-party cover would be if you are selling directly to the end consumer under your own branding and packaging and own name, etc. And there's no other party between you and the final end user. And then again, what kind of products are you producing? Are they particularly high volume? Are they low volume but very complex, so that if you have a product recall and it requires an incredibly complex process to recall these things, specialized machinery, if you're dealing with non-agri products, for example, that's going to affect the risk that you're undertaking. Whether you are just local or whether you're exporting products, what are the laws around product recalls in those other jurisdictions? Do you understand them? Are they stricter than ours or not as strict? And that kind of brings you to considering the agreements that are in place. Are they on standard versus non-standard terms? What liability has the insured undertaken? Because that's going to affect the risk. So at all times, you need to understand the risk and then place it accordingly. And as I mentioned, there may not be cover that covers everything, and you need to look at other risk mitigation protocols. Then just looking onto the ground at the actual insurance operations, the National Consumer Commissioner has provided a guideline on the steps to be taken when you have to conduct a recall. And typically you would put those obligations into a recall plan. And that plan would outline who is responsible, who are the important persons at the insured that's going to be dealing with the product recall, what are the procedures in place to trace affected products, and at all times, again, the quicker one can move, the better. And then finally, just want to mention what is considered a critical risk mitigation measure is conducting a mock recall. And the recommendation is that that is done at least once a year, but also if there's a significant change in your operations, if the insured signs a massive new contract in a different jurisdiction, or if they introduce a new product line, there are various reasons why the risk might change in its nature, and it would be a good idea to conduct a mock recall. Okay, thanks for listening to me. I'm now going to pass over to Bonnie, and she's going to talk about a case study.
Good morning, everyone. Just finding the screen to share. Today, I thought it would be interesting to chat to you about a real-life example of a case that Jay and myself dealt with in the context of product liability in the food space. We were asked to give an opinion to an insurer on whether a policy had to respond to a product recall. Now, the facts in short of the matter were that we represented a food manufacturer, or that was the insured, who produced fresh, frozen, and long-life products for consumers throughout South Africa and global markets, including Australia and New Zealand. So this insured presented with losses, which resulted in a product recall as a result of the leaking or blowing up of fruit cups. These fruit cups, similar to the picture that you see on your screen, were produced and manufactured at the insured's plant in Wellington and supplied on order to agents within Australia and New Zealand. They consisted of approximately 80 grams of diced fruit and 40 grams of liquid syrup. And these cups were then packaged in cartons made up of packs of 24 or 48 cups. The insured's agent in Australia then reported that these cartons had exhibited certain wet patches on some and not all of the cartons. So when these cartons were examined, it was established that some of the fruit cups had leaked and had blown up, causing the wet patches on the cartons. And this had resulted in the entire carton being rejected, which then obviously resulted in the insured recalling the cartons. But only those cartons that had shown these signs of leakage or blowing up were recalled by the insured. Now, to understand the manufacturing process, these cups were filled at the insured's plant in Wellington before they were closed, and they underwent thermal processing to ensure the traditional pasteurization process was followed to produce a commercially sterile product. The insured then conducted a visual examination as well as a burst test, and then the product had to sit in a warehouse for a certain period of time known as the incubation period. And this is usually a time period of 2 to 3 weeks. But in this specific instance, this time period was shortened to 1 week due to pressure being placed on the insured by the agent in Australia for prompt delivery of the product. It's important just to bear in mind that this was the only product or the only time that the product exhibited problems for the insured, as the insured had previously delivered approximately 10 million units of these fruit cups to Australia without any comeback or any complaints in respect of issues. The insured is very proactive in investigating what had gone wrong here. They appointed an expert from the University of Stellenbosch to comment on the potential contamination, and also NAMPAC to comment on the packaging issues. The consensus reached was that the contaminant was mold. So other contaminants such as bacteria or yeast were also identified and are generally present in products such as these. And it was not a known fact whether this could have caused illness if it was consumed. So during our investigations, we established that mold, and I'm sure you will all know, if you know something about the food production process, mold is always present during this process. It's impossible to entirely eradicate it. And it occurs naturally during the process of food production, which includes the loading of natural fruit, the washing of fruits, and the design of the particular plant, as well as the equipment used in the manufacturing process. So in this particular matter, the problem that occurred was that the degree of mold naturally present in the product was actually higher than normal, which was due to a variety of reasons, but this resulted in the thermal processing not being sufficient to eradicate the mold. The loss adjusters who were involved also conducted examinations and established that the insured had actually started reusing water in its plant, because this was during the drought. As Tiaan mentioned, Day Zero was a very real problem for us in the Western Cape, and a lot of businesses started using grey water, and in this circumstance, it also apparently resulted in the mold being higher than normal. So the impact was that the mold was not entirely eliminated before the fruit cups were sealed. The claims made by the insured were for the value of the cartons of the fruit cups that were paid for by the customers, but then had to be recalled. So this included the costs of sorting and disposing of the leaking fruit cups. As Jay mentioned earlier, with the first and third party claims, this was a first party claim. There were no third party claims here. So no third parties such as customers had consumed the product and reported illness or injury, nor was there any property damage. So as far as the policy itself was concerned, it provided that the insured would be indemnified for costs which arose directly or indirectly out of the recall of the product caused by a product defect, provided that it was discovered during the period of insurance, etc. The particular product, or the policy defined a product defect as existing or suspected contamination of an insured product resulting from error or fault in the manufacturing of this product, which is likely to cause injury or property damage, or is the subject of an order of public authority. So injury in this context means injury, death, illness, disease, or shock. And property means material property. And this definition excluded pure economic loss or another tangible loss. So when you go through the tick box exercise, it was clear that there was a contamination of the product. This was the presence and the proliferation of mold or some other contaminant in the fruit cup, which resulted in these fruit cups blowing. The next question was less clear-cut, was whether this contamination was caused by an error or fault in the manufacturing process. So on balance and on the facts available to us, we established that the contamination was caused by a combination of the unsanitary factory conditions, and the higher the normal concentration of bacteria and mold in the air. So we were able to tick that box too. Then the final question was whether the impairment or contamination was likely to cause injury or illness. And this was a bit more of a difficult one to answer. So the impairment in the actual packaging was obviously not a problem, but the issue was whether the contaminant within the fruit cup, if consumed, were to cause illness or injury. It was difficult for us to identify what exactly that contaminant was and whether it was pathogenic or toxic. We therefore had to consider what was the thinking of the insured at the time when the decision was taken to recall the product. The definition in the policy only referred to an existing or suspected contamination. So in other words, did the insured suspect a contamination, and was that sufficient to recall the product? So us lawyers, we always look at the case law and what the courts have found in similar cases. But in South Africa, it's quite interesting that the courts have not had to consider this type of policy before. So we looked at the international cases to decide if there was something similar. And this case that I've mentioned to you, the Little Lady Foods versus Houston CAS company, was quite on point. And surprise, surprise, concerned a burrito. It seems to me that this is often the case in the US, where I think Chipotle was the other brand that had a similar issue with potential contamination of the product. But here it was a Little Lady burrito, and the question was whether this burrito had been contaminated with listeriosis. Now, I don't know too much about listeriosis, but obviously it was quite a hot topic in South Africa too a couple of years ago. But there are different strains of listeria, and only one of these particular strains causes listeriosis. So Little Lady Foods had to hold back on the burritos while they were tested for this strain of listeria, which could potentially cause listeriosis. The finding was that none of the burritos tested positive for this particular strain, but Little Lady Foods suffered damage when it held back on the product and it wasn't able to sell. The court actually sided with the insurer in this case, and saying that Little Lady's belief that harm might likely result from the bacteria was irrelevant, as there was no such danger. The court just warned against siding with the insured in this situation, because the policy would otherwise have to be rewritten to require a likelihood that the product is contaminated, rather than the likelihood that the contaminant is actually dangerous. So returning to our present case of the fruit cups, and the thinking of the insured, one argument was that the insured suspected contamination and suspected that this could have caused danger and potentially illness or injury to someone who consumed it, and therefore acted reasonably in recalling these products. However, and after we had given this much thought, our view was that the insured did not recall each and every cup. So the insured did not think that consuming any of these fruit cups produced in a particular batch could have made someone sick or ill. Otherwise, it would have recalled the entire batch that was produced. Instead, it only recalled those fruit cups where it was quite obvious that a leaking or blowing had occurred, and these fruit cups were then considered not fit for consumption, while the rest was still out in the world. So our opinion was, yes, that there was a recall as defined by the policy, but the policy did not need to respond here as a result of there having been no existing or suspected contamination of such a nature to cause illness to someone when they consumed it. So just to explain it further, the hurdle that the insured here failed to overcome was that the contamination must have been caused or likely to cause injury or illness. And there was no evidence that contamination of these fruit cups was likely to cause injury or illness. So whilst you can eat mold, I'm sure none of you want to eat mold, and I'm sure mold's not going to taste nice and it's not going to feel nice in your mouth, but we didn't know if it was going to make you sick or require you to be hospitalized or kill you. Unlikely, but that was the situation. So I know we are short on time today. I'm not going to run through the exclusions in the policy, but there was one particular exclusion that we did find quite relevant and which you might find interesting today. And that was the insured's decision to reduce the incubation period of the fruit cups from 2 to 3 weeks down to 1 week. So in terms of the policy, we said to the insurer that this could possibly have been seen as a deliberate act or omission on the part of the insured. But the contaminant was already within the fruit cup at the time when they went into the incubation room. And the only thing that would have changed if this incubation period had been extended or had actually been followed as per the insured's protocol would have been that they would have been able to pick up on the contaminant at an earlier stage, possibly before it was shipped to Australia or New Zealand. So after we provided this opinion to the insurer, it obviously was quite a controversial one and not a very popular opinion to suggest that a claim be rejected. We did say to the insurer, it would be a good idea to give the insured an opportunity to meet with the insurer to explain to the insurer the reasoning and the thinking behind the product recall, as there might be more to it. There might be more facts that we didn't have at our disposal when giving the opinion. Also, as lawyers, we very much appreciate that insurers have certain commercial and special relationships with insureds, and that they often do not want to reject a claim, even if there are clear reasons to do so, based on commercial realities, based on the fact that an insured is a long-standing client, that they've got a good relationship with that client, that insured pays very good premiums. So there are lots of factors at play. And I do think that in this circumstance, the insurer decided to honor the insured's claim. So you can see from today's discussion that both Jay and I had, there are quite a lot of legal aspects and technical aspects that need to be considered in the context of food production, in the context of policy responses, and dealing with an insured and an insurer when it comes to these issues. So that's why we suggest that you lawyer up and that you get assistance from a lawyer, or at least approach an insurer to get assistance from a lawyer on your behalf, to guide you through this process and to guide the insurer through the process of logging claims with an insurer, dealing with a product recall, ensuring that the legislative framework is properly interpreted, and that the whole process is just, complies with the relevant legislative requirements. That's why we're here. That's why you have lawyers with expertise in this kind of field. So whenever you deal with similar issues, you know where to come. Thanks, ladies and gents, and that's all from our side today.
Okay, thanks Bonnie, thanks Jay. I think it's actually quite interesting. I agree, malt probably doesn't taste nice. I don't know what it would have been had you been, whether it would have been either eaten or whether it would have been inhaled, whether your opinion would have changed, but it's really quite a nice, interesting example. And I also thought, kind of looking back at what we've discussed today and what you and Jay, is that, with food, and last week, I don't know if you were in last week, we had someone that talking about ESG with a German accent. Today I'm doing it with an Afrikaans accent, but there's with food and food sustainability, there is an entire ESG movement that's got to grow around food and food sustainability. Because ultimately we got to ensure that we need to feed 8 billion people. We need to ensure that we and also feed them safely. And as I was saying, in this instance, it's quite interesting to see the effect, what the drought at the time had just onto food production, and some of the safety precautions that were probably overlooked or lacking. So I think thanks so much. It's very interesting. I think if there are questions, Natalia, whoever,
I can't see any questions in the Q&A box. Can't see anything there from my side.
Okay, that's good.
Just in the chat box, a lot of thank yous.
Thank you for all the feedback, everyone, and for all the compliments. It was nice to present to you this morning.
Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks, Jay. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. If that's it and there are no questions, then we can say goodbye. You've got a few minutes to spare.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. And for those of you that do want to say goodbye, I don't know how it's normally done on, how the marketing team does it, but if you can say goodbye, you can say goodbye.
Thanks, guys.